Hotel. Welcome to Journey to Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Today, the topic is compassion in action. That subject came to me as I was engaging in some reflection and just noticing some of the things that had been occurring in my life. And one of the common themes that had come up was the subject of having compassion. Compassion is something that can be applied in many areas of our lives, including relationships, sometimes even, especially with relationships. We think about compassion in terms of like, doing service, uh, helping others, but it is also really, key in terms of how we interact with others, and particularly as we experience our relationships with others. In spirituality, often you'll see that as you're applying a particular spiritual principle, other spiritual principles also come into play. And this is one of them in terms of having compassion. One of the primary spiritual concepts that will put into context the need to be able to have compassion is the fact that most of us aren't living in the present moment. We're not living in the now. And as we've talked about on some of our previous shows, most of us are are reacting. Most people are reacting to things that have happened to them in the past. Many times, the things that they are reacting to are things that occurred in the early part of their lives when they were children. How we interpret those events that occurred when we were children resulted in us feeling some level of trauma, hurt, pain. And so as we go through our lives, we will have experiences that remind us, that bring to mind those feelings of pain that we experienced in the early part of our lives. And, they'll result in pain because it reminds us of, of that event, that circumstance. And so that's why often we may have encounters with people where we may say or do something, and their reaction seems to be disproportionate to what was said or what was happening in that moment, because they are not experiencing the current moment. They are reliving and re experiencing that past moment that resulted in trauma or pain. Okay. And so, one of the key things to realize is that since most people are not acting in the moment, they're not reacting based upon what is happening in the now and the present. They're not reacting to what we have said or done. They're actually being triggered by something that has happened to them in the past. And so when we really grasp that understanding that what people are doing and reacting to is based upon something that has happened in the past, then we come to the realization that what they're doing, how they're reacting, isn't about us. So tend to we tend to react as though it was about us. We end up in turn getting triggered by how they react to us, and it ends up becoming a bit of a cycle. So as we progress in our spiritual journeys, it's important for us to be able to assimilate and put into practice the spiritual principles that we've learned. So it's not enough for us to be able to recognize that most people aren't operating in the present moment. Most people aren't operating in the now. But having that understanding, that realization, then it becomes incumbent upon us to incorporate that understanding into how we relate to people. And remember, I made the point about how we can apply this in relationships. The root word of relationships is to relate. And that is one thing that seems to be one of the primary things that's missing from our relationships, is that we are not relating to each other. We're basically looking to be able to see what we can gain from each other. It's about being able to relate. And so relating requires us to be able to see things from the other person's perspective and try to gain an understanding as to why they are reacting the way they do, or to at least be able to relate. We may not necessarily agree with what they're doing, and it may not be, and probably won't be at times, an appropriate thing to do, because again, what they're doing isn't based upon anything that's really happening in the moment. So often it will be disproportionate to what's actually happening in the moment. And so the point of being able to have compassion is, when we recognize that what someone is doing at any given moment is not based upon what's happening now. It's based upon things that have happened in the past, and it is not about us. They are not doing anything to us intentionally. Indeed, it's the case that most of the time, in general, most people don't even realize what they're doing at any given moment or why they're doing it. More often than not, if you were to ask people why they're doing a certain thing at that particular moment, at any time, you might stump them and they might have a difficulty being able to explain why they're doing it, because so many times we just operate in autopilot and just do things because that's something that we've always done, or something that we've always observed somebody else doing, and we just repeat it because that's just how things have been done. But we never engage in any time of critical analysis to determine whether or not that's an appropriate thing to do. Brother Jamal says, yes, we tend to position ourselves to give a comeback response and not really understand what the other side is saying. And that's absolutely true, because most people aren't really listening to what somebody else is saying. They're just like waiting for a break in order for them to be able to get in their piece, right? So they're not really hearing what they're saying. They're really just trying to figure out when they can have an opportunity to speak and to share their own viewpoint and perspective on things. And so, and that's not really how you're able to be able to relate to people. So then, one of the skills that we need to develop in order to be able to have compassion is to be able to listen to another person. We gain great insights from just being able to listen, and to be able to, from listening, we can pick up some clues as to where someone's coming from. If we listen to people enough, they'll basically tell us what their life experiences have been, particularly if they're people that are close to us. And in particular, if we're in a relationship with them, there's absolutely going to be a point where, they're going to be, relating their life experiences. And in those moments, it's important. And that's like whether you're a male or a female, it's important to be able to listen to the perspective of your partner, to listen to what they share with you in terms of their life experience. Then you can gain some perspective as to what is causing them to react to things the way they do. To be able to see what their influences were, how they grew up, what they observed, right? Because, as I mentioned, people are often just mimicking what they've observed other people do, typically their parents, or and just end up repeating the same patterns that they observed. And then also, as I mentioned, reacting to some of the things that they experienced that ended up resulting in pain. Okay. And so, as we listen to people, we can gain some perspective and be able to have a level of understanding about why people react to things the way they do. Okay. And again, when we are able to do that, we realize that what people are doing and what people are saying isn't about us. We learn to be able to not take things personally, because people are not doing things to us. They're doing things, they're not necessarily aware of what they're doing or why they're doing it. Now, the ideal situation is that, particularly if you're in a relationship with someone, I would strongly suggest that, if you're a spiritual person, you're on a spiritual path, that you find someone who is similarly on the spiritual path and moving in the same direction that you are, and ideally someone who is putting into practice the spiritual principles that they've learned. And I would say that one of the key things that you want to look for is someone who has some level of introspection someone who takes accountability and again is trying to apply the spiritual principles in their lives. But we have to do that as well. We can't expect someone to do or require someone to do something that we're not willing to do. So as we're applying the spiritual principles in our lives, it's important for us to be in awareness of ourselves, for us to take accountability for our own actions, for us to be in observation of ourselves, and to also realize that it's important for us to be present in the current moment so that we are not caught up in reaction mode, that we're not reacting to things that have happened to us in the past, that we are in the present moment and choosing how we want to respond to a certain situation um, or to a person um, appropriate for that situation. And what happens too often is that particularly if someone gets upset, um, we take it personally. We end up reacting to it, and because we've gotten triggered, and so it ends up becoming a tennis match or a ping pong match where we're just slinging reactions back and forth, and and so no one's present. But we can break that cycle, by pulling back from reacting, bringing ourselves into the present moment, realizing that the other person isn't in the present, that they're reacting, and that can be a means for us to be able to de-escalate the situation, because then when we come to that understanding, we can pull back from the tennis match. We can pull out of the game of reacting and realize that what they're doing is not about us. That we don't take what they're doing personally, and then can have compassion for the fact that they've been triggered and be able to respond accordingly in a more compassionate manner, to where we're not um, reacting in anger or any kind of negative emotion. See, Mr. T gives a gives a thumbs up um, on this. Uh, but yeah, so I think that's really important, for us to be able to do. And I've experienced that in in my relationships with a number of people, and I found that to be the case, that from listening to people explain to me what their life experiences are and were, that from doing so, from just listening to them, I've been able to recognize, what things will trigger them, or what things have, caused them to basically uh, just react to things the way that they do. And so it gives me, a lot of insight into, how to be able to respond to people and to be mindful of not taking things perfectly. Now, personally, now I can't say that I've like just become perfected at that. I've caught myself and uh, initially reacting to it by taking some things personally, but I was able to with awareness be able to like step back and reflect upon the fact that I got into reaction mode and ended up playing the tennis game, right? But I because of the fact that I'm actively and intentionally making it a point to put the spiritual practices that I've learned um, in to how I experience life. Uh, it's enabled me to be able to bring myself out of reaction mode, out of being in the past, and bringing myself back into the present moment to where I can have compassion. Because you can't have compassion, when you're caught up in negative emotion. You have to be able to maintain a certain level of detachment. So, and even as I say that, that brings in another spiritual principle that's important is, for us to be able to establish and be able to maintain a certain level of detachment such that we can be in a place where we can be in observation of ourselves while we're experiencing life. And that is one of the most ideal things that we want to be able to achieve is developing the ability to be able to observe life as we're experiencing life. And that also reinforces the benefit of engaging in meditation because as I've explained often that through meditation we learn certain spiritual principles. In meditation we learn the skill of being able to detach from thoughts and just allow them to be able to observe them and not react to them, right? Just to observe them and let them be, not give any energy to them. And the more proficient we are at doing that, then we reach a state of detachment to where we're basically observing our minds. Okay, so we develop the ability to detach. We develop the ability to observe ourselves when we are in meditation. And so when we realize that we've developed those skills from the practice of meditation, we come to the realization that that's a skill that we can apply outside of meditation. We can apply those skills in terms of how we engage in life. Okay, so those skills are transferable. It's not something that we can only do or should only do in meditation. It's something that we can and should apply to our lives. And we do so to the extent that life ends up becoming for us a sort of a waking meditation. So the ideal situation is for us to be able to experience life, engage in life, be fully present in the moment, and then responding to the moment as is appropriate for what's happening in that moment, and observing ourselves while we're doing so. We're experiencing life and observing life at the same time so that we can choose how do we want to respond to the events that occur in our lives rather than being in reaction. Now, we can see that in action, anytime we happen to be and are blessed to be in the presence of a realized master like uh, like my own guru, Amma. Whenever I'm in her presence, I'm able to observe how she's fully established in the present moment. And as she's fully present in the current moment, every encounter that she has with an individual is appropriate for her experience with that particular person. And if you observe her, you'll see that her actions will always change her, moods will change in such a way that is appropriate for her interaction with the person that she's with in that moment. But as she teaches us, she doesn't become any of those emotions. Those emotions don't take her over. And she's told us that we should develop the ability to choose our emotions as if we were to choose our wardrobe on any given day. Often we choose our wardrobe based upon what we're planning to do, or we choose what's appropriate based upon the weather. We may choose a certain wardrobe to wear to an interview, to go to a job. We'll wear something else to go to a sporting event, uh, to go to a social event, to go to a sporting event. So, but whatever we end up choosing to wear is appropriate for that situation, for that circumstance, or for whoever we might be with. So when that event is over, we go and change our clothes. We go home and change our clothes, right? So in the same way, we can choose our emotions and respond to people or to the situation in such a way that's appropriate for that circumstance. We choose an emotion that's appropriate for that particular circumstance. But when that situation is over with, we can put that emotion back in the closet. We don't need to use it anymore. We don't become the emotion. We just used it because it was appropriate in that particular uh, situation. Okay, so compassion involves the ability to be able to one, listen, two, to fully be present in the moment. 3, to be able to detach and observe ourselves, to observe the situation. And 4, to be able to, as a result of being detached and being in observation, to be able to choose the right response for that circumstance. And then finally, to choose our action based upon an understanding that we've developed from our compassion for others, from being able to listen and relate to what their experience is. Okay. And so we will, if we've done so, and been able to listen to them effectively, then part of compassion is to refrain from doing things that we have become aware is something that triggers someone else. Okay. Now, saying that is not to say that we should become responsible for someone else's emotions. I'm not saying that. We're not responsible for someone else's emotions, um, and if that person doesn't have the awareness or is not trying to develop any kind of self-awareness, um, that we should continue to put ourselves in difficult situations and just tolerate um, negative reactions and allowing ourselves to be um, in a negative situation with people continuously. So that's not something that I advocate or what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that having the compassion is something that we do in particular for somebody that we're maintaining a relationship with. Now, of course, we do want to have compassion for others at all times and not take things personally, but we don't want to put ourselves in a position to where we're experiencing the fallout of someone else's negative reactions, right? So if we find ourselves with people who can't be in the present, who are constantly reacting, and in doing so are blaming us for their actions, that's not a person that we want to continue to associate with. Okay, so if we find ourselves in that type of situation, then we make the decision to end that, because I always recommend, though, a yogi is responsible for developing the capacity to be at peace and calmness in the midst of a storm. I also advocate for people to get out of storms as much as possible or to avoid storms. Okay. And so the message that I'm imparting to you in regards to compassion uh, applies more to when we have someone who we are working with who is moving in the same direction as us, someone who is intentional about advancing on the spiritual path with us, then we can continue to maintain an ongoing relationship and be able to have ongoing compassion for them, because though they're on the path, they're not going to be perfect any more than we are. There are going to be times when uh, we will lose sight of being in the current moment. We will find ourselves in reaction mode. We'll find ourselves repeating old patterns. But as we develop and expand our level of awareness, we will notice it and be able to break it. And so, part of the objective of having compassion is to realize that who we're with ideally is doing the same thing. And they are going to, at times, uh, lose awareness and be in reaction mode. And we should be able to uh, have compassion and forgive them for it, um, particularly if they come to the awareness themselves and recognize it and take ownership of it. Okay, and I recently had that experience where an individual had reacted to me in a way that was not um, indicative of what was happening at the moment. Right, it wasn't the reaction uh, was extreme based upon the nature of the conversation that I was having with them. And, it took me by surprise. But to my credit, in that moment, I didn't react to it. I didn't really understand it, but I didn't react to it and I didn't take it personally. And it could be the fact that I didn't react to it and get caught up in any negative energy as a result of that reaction that gave the other person the space to be able to observe, to reflect, to engage in introspection. And that person did that. And as a result, they came and apologized for it because they reflected on it. And not only did they reflect on it, they were able to identify that they were actually reacting to something that was triggering for them and acknowledge that what they did wasn't about me. Okay. And so when I'm explaining that the ideal situation is that you have someone who is on that same path, then you can have compassion, you can assist each other on the journey. You can give them place to make mistakes and have the compassion and ability to forgive them for it because it wasn't about you and you recognize that and you don't react to it in a negative way and you give them space to be able to engage in introspection and reflect and And if they're on that path, they will do that and will appreciate the fact that you didn't get caught up in it personally. You didn't take it personally and uh, escalate the situation as a result. I'll share with you an experience that I think is instructive and that you can relate to in in that regard. It may not relate so much to a relationship type of situation, but the principle of detachment, I think, is relevant. Okay, so the situation was um, I was working downtown, and I had decided to go to lunch with my coworkers, and as we were on our way to lunch, we observed a confrontation, an argument between two black men, one of whom was a businessman dressed in a suit, and the other one was a uh, homeless man. They were positioned across the street from each other and were arguing at each other back and forth from across the street. This went on for a little bit of time until the businessman brother, who basically finally came to the realization that it was really not worth his time to be engaging in this argument across the street with this guy. So he came to that realization and decided to go on about his business. So by the time that argument ended, me and my coworkers had crossed the street and we were on the side of the street that the homeless guy was on. But the homeless guy was still clearly agitated. He was still in that argumentative, negative energy. And he was looking for somebody else to engage with. And so he started walking in our direction. He saw us and he started walking in our direction. Now, my counterparts, my coworkers were white, and they, seeing an angry black homeless man approaching us, they uh, got fearful, and so me sensing their fear and discomfort, I slowed down and let the brother approach me and let them go. So the brother approaches me, and he's um, yelling and cursing at me. Now, in that moment, I had a choice, and I did hear the the ego self, the lower nature voice, um, trying to egg me on to react to him in kind. So I heard the voice of wanting to suggesting that I tell him something like, who you think you talking to? Okay, but that would have been a reaction, and I chose not to do that. I chose not to react. I chose to stay detached, to stay in peace, and just respond. So I responded to the brother in a calm matter of fact manner, um, but I was calm, and he reacted back, continued in his angry energy, still uh, yelling and cursing. I still just responded calmly to him, and But it became apparent that he wanted to continue to engage with me. So he continued. I continued to respond calmly. But as that exchange continued on, his mood started slowly changing. The volume of his voice started coming down, and his energy started becoming calm like mine. And it got to a point where it was so noticeable that even he noticed it and was kind of taken aback by it. And, he asked me, how did I do that? How did I, just remain so calm? And, I told him that was just basically, my nature. But, the brother still, he wanted to continue to talk, and we just, at that point, he had calmed completely down, and me and him were just talking. So, I can continue to carry on a good conversation with the brother. And he walked me to the corner, and I got to the corner and decided, told him that I was going to go and join my co-workers for lunch, dapped him up, and, went on my way. Okay, so I tell this story to illustrate that I stayed present in the moment. I didn't react. I chose how I wanted to respond in that situation. I didn't react and join his energy. The other instructive thing is that two opposing energies cannot occupy the same space. So he made the decision to stay in my presence. And since I was not giving him the energy in order for him to be able to stay in an agitated state, I wasn't giving him that fuel, because that type of negative energy, anger, needs fuel in order to be able to sustain itself, like fire. Fire requires fuel in order for the fire to continue to burn. Um, I wasn't giving him the energy in order for him to be able to stay in that state. So his fire burned out. In fact, I was kind of more giving him water, because he stayed in my presence. The water cooling energy that I was exhibiting ended up putting out his fire, and so he ended up calming down. Now, if he wanted to stay in the agitated state, then he would have had to leave my presence, because I wasn't giving him the fuel necessary to stay there. And so he would have had to go and find someone, engage with someone who was giving him that energy. And that's why when he was having the encounter with the other uh, brother, the businessman, he was giving him the energy in order to be able to stay in that state. But I didn't. And that was a choice. And he made a choice. He ended up making a choice that he wanted to stay in my presence, which ended up requiring him to join my energy. Okay. And so that's just an example of how we can apply these things. So it's not just a an abstract thing that just is in some spiritual book. We can do this. I did it. Okay, and if I can do it, you can do it. Because I'm not perfect, right? So anybody can do it. It just it just takes practice, just like with anything else. If we're like learning anything, we have to practice it in order to be able to master it. So people often say, it's all right, it's easier said than done, blah blah blah. Everything's easier said than done. Until we start doing it and start practicing it, we become more proficient with it. So we just have to start doing it, right? We're not going to get it by not doing it. So we have to, make the effort. And if we continuously make the effort, we become more proficient at being able to do it. And so, we can do that. Um, so I would encourage you to, put those things into practice to learn to be able to, just be present in the moment, um, to be in observation of oneself, to be able to then not only be then also observe oneself, but to be able to listen and observe others and gain some insight into who they are and what makes them tick, so to speak. And then consequently, be able to have compassion for them and acknowledge and recognize that what they're doing is not about us. They're not doing it to us. They're doing it and reacting based upon something that's happened in the past. And when we recognize that, then we don't take it personally, and we can have compassion for them, um, and not react in kind. We can just choose how we want to respond to them. Okay, so these are some practical things that we can put into place. As we are on our journey into self, to ascend on our spiritual journeys by implementing, the spiritual principles in our lives, raising our vibrations, and having a positive influence on the people around us. Right. So that's what we can do, and I encourage us to do that. Again, practice makes perfect. I encourage you, as I pointed out again, and continue to point out, will always continue to point out, to engage in regular meditation, which will help foster the development of the skills necessary for us to be able to apply those in our lives in such a way that our life ends up becoming a waking meditation, in that we can observe life as we experience life. So, with that, I'm going to thank you for joining us here on Journey into Self. I know that if you put this into practice, it will make a big difference in your life and make a big difference in the relationships that you have with others. It'll, whether it's work relationships, um, romantic, personal relationships, that serve you well and will be beneficial, or it will give you the insights you need to make a better decision on the type of relationship uh, that you engage in. But it will certainly be a benefit to you when you put it into practice, and I'm trusting that you will. If you do need help in that regard, and counsel someone to you know vent and help you in the process of being able to implement these things in your lives, do reach out to me. You can contact me over Facebook message. Um, I will check those occasionally, but the most effective way is to visit my website, which is www.sa-ra.org. Again, that's www.sa-ra.org, where you can go and set up a initial free 30-minute appointment with me. We can talk, get to know each other, and figure out the best way that I can be of service to you. Um, and we go from there. So, but I do this, because I think that, this is my service, to humanity, and I think that, well, I know that if you do put these things into practice, because I've done it and benefited from it, that it'll benefit you too. So, with that, thank you for tuning in and listening, and I encourage you to listen to it again, and it will be, you can find it on YouTube, and it'll be on for a little while on Facebook for your review. So, um, again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time here on Journey in the South. Hotep, see you next time.